Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks, kicking off fall camp later this week. And this is going to be a really fun program to monitor over the next couple of weeks. And what I mean by that is, look, I know, or at least I'm pretty dang confident, that this South Carolina football team is going to be pretty dang good in 2025. When you have a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers, when you have someone coming off the edge like Dylan Stewart, when you have the secondary that South Carolina has, probably should add. You got a head coach in Shane Beamer that, at least in my opinion, I don't think there's been many coaches in this conference that have maximized their roster like Shane Beamer has over the last couple of years. And you could argue that this might be the best roster that Shane Beamer has had during his tenure. So there's a lot of reason to believe that this football team is going to be good. I don't think I'm breaking any news to the South Carolina fans. What makes this fall camp period so exciting is this is where we get a feel for, hey, can this team make that jump from, preseason expectations, maybe 8-4? Can they be a 10-2 team that goes to the college football playoffs? I think you're going to learn a lot about the potential of this football team in terms of that ceiling with what you hear from some of the young talent during fall camp, because there are a lot of positions where, on the surface, maybe to the national media, there's a lot of concern. You look at the wide receiver room and say, well, they don't really have a guy that's proven in the SEC. Well, there's a lot of internal optimism around this wide receiver room going into 2025. Some of these younger names, these are the guys that, at least in my opinion, can take this South Carolina team from a damn good 8-4 team to a team that's 10-2 and being very dangerous in the college football playoffs. And we're going to figure out a lot about which of the young talents going to be ready as they work through fall camp over the next couple of weeks. One of my favorite offseason episodes to do every single year, and that is call your shot. We in this South Carolina, this might be the best program to do this kind of episode for fall camp breakout candidates. Who do we think is going to break out, generate a lot of buzz, and kind of cement themselves as a difference maker for South Carolina going into 2025? Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. To the South Carolina fans, whether we're talking spring practice, recruiting in the summer, the amount of support y'all have shown the boys has been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Please let it fly in the comment section. Without further ado, can we talk about a wide receiver that I don't, when we've talked a lot about these wide receivers for South Carolina, I don't think we've uttered his name once during the offseason. That is Vandrevius Jacobs. This was a guy that 12 months ago we heard a little bit of buzz around, really wasn't able to cement himself as a rotational piece last year. Is this the year that we see Vandrevius Jacobs maybe break out a little bit? You continue to hear all the right things about this pass catcher room. It starts with a guy like Nick Arbor, who's fully focused on football, in my opinion, the wide receiver one. Then you hear stuff about Brian Rowe and then Malik Clark, or a guy like Donovan Murph, Andrevius Jacobs. This is probably one of the most intriguing position groups on this football team, where, again, there's going to be a lot of people in the national media that are doing their summer previews on South Carolina, and they're probably going to point to the wide receiver room and say, I got question marks about the wide receiver room. And look, I don't blame them for saying that. There's not a ton of guys that are proven producers, you might say, in the SEC. But at the same time, I look at this unit and then I look at what we're hearing coming out of spring practice and summer workouts and say, this could be a strength for South Carolina in 2025. Going back to how we talked about this unit in the winter portal window, I think on paper, a lot of South Carolina fans were surprised that Shane Beamer did not try to go out and get a bona fide stud at the wide receiver position to put around LaNorris Sellers going into 2025. Well, you fast forward to where we are now at the end of July. I think we figured out pretty dang quick why Shane Beamer did not feel the need to go out into the portal and add a wide receiver, because I think there's a lot of confidence with some of these names on this roster. And although they're not household names yet, I think there's a few guys that have the chance to really provide that. And what fires me up about Vandrevius Jacobs, this is another, you know, bigger body vertical guy that can work vertically down the field. And we look at LaNorris Sellers and we say, hey, what's one of the best things that he brings to the table as a thrower of the football? It's what he does pushing the ball downfield. The as many bodies and as many pass catchers that we can see emerge as vertical threats in this offense, the better. Because I think that plays into what LaNorris Sellers does best as a passer. And it's going to be really hard for opposing defenses because you look at South Carolina and say, look, I think they're going to run the football really dang well in 2025. The better you run the football, the more these teams have to start squeezing their safeties down into the box to help support the run. Now, when you start getting these teams to drop one safety into the box and only play with one high safety, well, guess what? Them boundary go balls, they start opening up a little bit more. That's the recipe for me for South Carolina. Run the dang football really well, push the ball down the field in the passing attack. If you can do those two things at a high level, it's going to be a very difficult offense to deal with every single Saturday. My optimism continues to grow with this wide receiver room. Now, I want to kind of skip over a lot of players and really focus in on some of the players on defense. And this is kind of a combination of my take, but also what we heard out of spring practice and summer workouts. Because I look at South Carolina and say, look, if this team's going to go 10-2 and make the playoffs, the defense has to pleasantly surprise us. I'm very confident in the offense. I think the offense takes a monster step in 2025. Now, you look at the defense and say, can they replicate what they did last year? Look, we got question marks about some of the players on this roster, at least some positions on this roster. How good can this defense be in 2025? Here's a name that I just have to put my hand up and kind of wear it. I was maybe wrong about Devontae Miles, putting together a really good spring practice. Sounded like he put together a very, very good summer workout where, hey, he's changing his body. He's getting his body right to compete at the SEC level. And that was my biggest question about Devontae Miles. I mean, I think a lot of South Carolina fans who've been rocking with the boys for the last 12 months go back to when we broke down the commitment of Devontae Miles from Bowling Green committing to South Carolina. I got up here and said, I went out and watched some Bowling Green football and said, I don't see an SEC football player there. I see maybe a depth piece at best, but I don't really see a guy that I feel comfortable contributing for South Carolina in 2025. Well, admit, this is why I'm doing this in my basement. And then that's why Shane Beamer's doing and getting paid the big bucks because apparently Devontae Miles is really putting it together for South Carolina. Now, am I getting up here and saying that he's going to be a first team all SEC guy? Is he going to be a TJ Sanders caliber player? No, probably not. Is he even going to start for South Carolina? No, probably not. But I look at Devontae Miles and say, well, it sounds like, at least it sounds like, he's going to be a guy that South Carolina can rely on for maybe 15 to 20 snaps a game. That's massive because my biggest concern about South Carolina is, look, are they going to be as disruptive as they were last year in the middle of that defensive line? No, probably not. My bigger concern was, do we have enough bodies that we trust? Well, now it sounds like, hey, Nick Barrett, Monkel Goodwin, we trust. Gabriel Brownlaw Dindy, we trust. Troy Pikes, I think, is a really good football player. Now Devontae Miles, we're up to 5. That was kind of the number we were trying to get to. And maybe that's where the number is at for South Carolina going into 2025. I think that's really important. It ain't always fun. It ain't always fun to talk about the rotational pieces on the defensive line. But if you want to be college football playoff team, you got to have depth. You got to have guys that you can rotate in there and have quality play from. And it sounds like Devontae Miles can give that to South Carolina in 2025. He is one of the more intriguing storylines to monitor during fall camp because it's about to get real. You know, it's one thing to flash in summer workouts, flash in spring practice. Hey, can you consistently every single day at practice and fall camp show you're a guy that South Carolina can lean on in 2025? Really, he's not a flashy name to talk about. Gonna be important for South Carolina in 2025. How about JT Gear? This is a guy that I've been saying his name wrong. Number one, number two. I mean, Dylan Stewart's probably not coming off the field all that much. We're trying to figure out, hey, on the other side of this defensive line, can we get solid play? Because we know Dylan Stewart's going to get the superstar treatment in 2025. Ain't no question about that. Double teams, chipping with tight ends, helping with running backs. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for whoever's rushing the passer on the other side of the defensive line to really be productive. My guy's Brian Thomas. I think Brian Thomas is a dang good football player, and we're hearing good things about Brian Thomas too, especially in terms of what he can do against the run. That's important because Brian Thomas last year was a rotational guy that kind of specialized as a pass rusher, but wasn't elite by any stretch of imagination against the run. Well, guess what, Brian Thomas, you're gonna have to play a lot more, probably double the snaps that you played last year. We need you to be solid against the run. Well, it sounds like Brian Thomas has taken that step, and it sounds like Jatius Gear, he's a guy that South Carolina is excited about as well. This defensive line was a little bit of a concern. Like we knew we had an absolute stud in Dylan Stewart, but we weren't really sure what else we could trust on the defensive line. And I'm not saying it's going to be as good as it was last year, because that's going to be hard to replace the production of a Kyle Kennard or a guy like TJ Sanders. But at the same time, maybe the defensive line is less of a concern than we thought it was going to be a couple of months ago. That's what you're looking for South Carolina, because you got other parts of this defense that I think can be really good. How about Sean Murphy taking command of a starting spot at linebacker? Well, Fred Johnson, Sean Murphy. We kind of said this all off season at the linebacker position. Look, I think they got the bodies. Now it's just got to come together. We got to get guys who are emerging as guys we can trust. Well, it sounds like we've gotten that with Sean Murphy and Fred Johnson. That's another intriguing storyline. Like, two of the biggest question marks that we had for South Carolina, defensive line depth, starting linebackers, starting to maybe get answered as we go into fall camp. And now you're just looking for a guy like Sean Murphy to really take control and become that guy we can trust every single snap. Then in the secondary, look, Peyton Williams, there are concerns about Peyton Williams. And look, I get it, because we haven't really seen Peyton Williams play a ton of football. One, are we being too critical of that? Like, at the end of the day, he was behind Nick Emanari and DQ Smith. It's hard to get. You can be a really good football player, not get on the field when you're behind those two guys at safety. And so I think to start, we were probably letting the fact that we don't know about Peyton Williams probably make us think he just can't play. I think that was probably the wrong assumption to make, because there was buzz around Jalen Kilgore kicking back to safety and maybe having a guy like Brandon Cisse play nickel. It sounds like Peyton Williams is going to stick at safety, and it sounds like Jalen Kilgore is going to stick at nickel. That kind of tells me that there's trust that Peyton Williams can be that starting safety we can rely on. Now, is he going to be a guy like Nick Emanari? No, probably not. But can he be a guy that does his job at a high level? It sounds like maybe we can think that. And so Peyton Williams becoming a very important name to monitor in fall camp, because it sounds like he's probably going to be your starting safety opposite DQ Smith. And look, having him play next to DQ Smith's big, because they ain't many safeties that have played more snaps than DQ Smith over the last couple of years. You're starting to see this roster come together, and that was always the question. Is like, we know that this South Carolina football team has legitimate high upside. Guys like Dylan Stewart, guys like LaNorris Sellers, there are some legitimate difference makers on this roster. Our biggest concern was, are we a complete football team? Do we have guys that we can trust at every single spot? Well, it sounds like maybe we're figuring that out a little bit. Going to be a really good, but really fun fall camp to talk about for South Carolina. We'll continue to kind of update these storylines as we go. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.